What's going on, YouTube? This is Dave Sarner, your host of the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show. This is the Week 3 edition, Episode 1. On today's episode, we're going to be going over 4 games on the docket here for Week 3, including the Thursday night matchup between the Miami Dolphins and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Followed up, there will be 3 1 o'clock games on this video. The Texans versus the Steelers, the Bengals going into Philadelphia to play the Eagles, and the San Francisco 49ers returning to MetLife Stadium to play the New York Giants. But before we get into the game-by-game analysis, I wanted to break down some news and note for injuries for you in Week 3. The Dolphins head into Jacksonville to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, they're going to be doing so without star free agent cornerback Byron Jones. Byron Jones has officially been ruled out for tonight's game with a groin and Achilles injury. He originally missed Wednesday's practice and it was officially questionable, but as of Thursday morning, he is officially out. Well, this could be great news for Jaguars wide receivers, including DJ Chark. However, that's if he plays. DJ Chark is officially questionable for tonight's matchup as well, with a chest and back injury, so keep a monitor on that for tonight's games and adjust your lineups accordingly. In the Texans vs. Steelers, Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson both missed practice Wednesday. However, this is a routine missed practice, and they've been doing it since the beginning of Week 1. Feel free to fire those 2 guys up in your fantasy lineups this week in what could be a really solid game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Next, we have the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Both teams are looking for their first victory of the season. However, the Eagles are going to have to do so without a few of their pieces. Left guard Isaac Seumalo is out on IR with a knee injury, and Jalen Reagor, the first-round rookie wide receiver, is out with a torn UCL in his thumb, and he will be missing multiple weeks. The final game on the docket is the 49ers versus the New York Football Giants. Now, we all know what happened with the Niners last week at MetLife Stadium, and it sounds like the turf could play into a big factor for some of the fantasy assets this week. It was reported that George Kittle might be ready to go. However, the quality of the turf and how it's feeling may determine if he's going to play this weekend. Other injuries that happened on the Giants side of things is Sterling Shepard, who is officially on IR for the next 3 weeks, and Devontae Freeman, signed in the midst of the Saquon Barkley injury for the year, was signed to a 1-year deal for $3 million. However, this week, Dion Lewis should be the play. That is all your news and notes for Week 3 edition of the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show. Now, without further ado, here is Episode 1. We are live for the first time on the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show. I'll be honest with you, I'm really excited to talk about Week 3 this week. There's a lot of things we got to discuss. There's also a lot of things that we really need to mourn about from Week 2. The biggest theme that I can think of is injuries, and so many of those things are going to play into what we're going to be talking about tonight and get you ready for every single one of Week 3's matchups. My name is Dave Sarner. I am your host here today, and to help me usher in the new week of the NFL season, I want to introduce to you my co-host who probably was affected by these injuries more than anyone else that I know personally. From the 4th and 1 pod, Mr. Matthew Ferreira. Matty, how you doing?
What's going on, man? God, not as good as I was last week. I'm not doing great right now. It's been rough. Like you said, those injuries, they really they came down like the hammer of Thor. Like you.
I mean, it's the way to go, right? And the only thing you can say is,
I'm in great pain.
And I know today you are.
It's so true. Like Dave knows this. I love Saquon. I'm also a huge Michigan fan. So I watched Saquon shred Michigan's defense one game. We had the top-ranked defense. We're predicted to go all the way that year. He shredded our defense on the first 2 plays of the game. I was like, fuck this kid today. I remember where I was. I was in Hoboken watching the game. I was like, but the Giants need to draft him. We could use a running back like that. Thinking we had 0 chance. I didn't think the Giants would finish poor enough to pick him up. Sure enough, we're there at the number 2 overall spot. I didn't watch the draft because I was in Avengers Infinity War.
Okay, you know what? I remember that.
And then, like, again, we came out, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm devastated by the loss of all my favorite superheroes, but at the same time, I'm elated to see that we drafted Saquon Barkley. So, bittersweet moment today 2 days ago watching that game. But Saquon, just you're the man. He's just a good overall dude. Like I know you're a Washington fan, but you can't hate Saquon. It's not
No.
If it had been Odell, yeah, if it had been Odell or something, I could have understood why people were mad. I can't imagine anyone's mad at Saquon Barkley right now. Like that's just a good dude.
I mean, you know what? It's funny because like I think I texted you this, but I remember when it happened. The first run when I thought he hurt his arm at first.
It looked like he got hurt the first one. Then they said him. My friend called this out that Daniel Jones had the opportunity to switch to play and didn't. Like ran whatever it was, and that's when Saquon got hurt. It was like back-to-back plays where you're like holding your breath, and then when he took the helmet off, I was like, no.
But you know what?
My shit.
I think I texted you this, but you know what I equated it to? You know, it was kind of it's how I felt when I watched Friday Night Lights and Booby Miles. You know, it's like
exactly what you said.
Went down the first time, you're like, oh
you're
god,
like,
and then when he came back a few weeks later, he's walking in, and you're like, you know, is he a smoke screen? I'm like, oh yeah, Booby. And then like 2 days later, he's out for the whole year, and they knew it, and it was just like I knew.
And his whole career.
And I knew the second hit was the end of his season. I knew it. I saw it. I saw the pain, and it reminded even
when he took off the helmet. As soon as he took off the helmet, I was like, oh god, like this is it, like.
Yep.
So for everyone who doesn't know, which I'd imagine is the greater majority of the internet here, so I employed a very unique and very bold strategy for my fantasy football team this year. It's an auction draft league with a super flex. So I decided, you know what, this is going to be a very uncertain league year. I want to go with the guaranteed guys that I know can carry the train. So I spent most of my budget on Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey. Moment of silence for my fantasy team. Somehow I still pulled off the win this week, though, which is a plus. I'll take that all day. But that's because included with my value picks after spending most of my budget on them were Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. So the two of them are kind of keeping me afloat right now.
And for those of you who don't know, he runs a super flex league. So obviously you can start 2 quarterbacks in that league, right, Matt?
Yeah,
correct.
That's correct.
So I mean, if you guys have that in 2 quarterback leagues, you're pretty golden right now.
That's what I'm saying. And people keep trying to trade me like, oh, if you give up Kyler or give you a running back. I'm like, I'm not trading. Because now here's the thing. People are offering me that. Christian McCaffrey is coming back. Will he be 100%? No, but he's still Christian McCaffrey. And I have both their handcuffs. That's another big thing. I have both handcuffs I've got Mike Davis and I've got what's his face for the Giants, so I should know, but I'm just so butthurt about that I never remember his name. Thank you, Deion Lewis. So I have both of them already, drafted them. So I'm not in as bad of a predicament as I would be otherwise.
For right now, let's drop into our week 3 matchups, game by game. Let's get into this, Matt. And let's just start off right away. We got 10 minutes on the clock, and we're going to start off with week 3, Thursday night matchup. Matt, Dolphins at Jaguars, baby. Last week we saw the Dolphins pretty much actually have a really competitive game against the Buffalo Bills, much more competitive than I was going to give them credit for after how they kind of shit the bed against New England in week 1. But they are facing up against a Jacksonville team who had a really nice game themselves and just managed to lose it by that much as well, the Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked about them, Matt, and before we get into Dolphins, I want to go Jaguars first because let's be real, Gardner Minshew, like we said, went off 23 fantasy points. He had 339 yards. The actual numbers, 30 for 45. I think he had like 20 attempts last week, so that doubled this week. 3 touchdowns. He did have the 2 picks, but he looked like Gardner Minshew.
To me, the best part of this entire matchup isn't even football related. It's the shit talking between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Gardner Minshew.
Agreed.
But I mean, this could end up being a really good game. The Dolphins, in my opinion, are still a very underrated team.
Yep.
Overall, it could be because I'm a little bit biased. They're kind of my AFC team. But I honestly really do think that they have the talent to kind of move forward. We still haven't seen Tua take the field. So if they really want to, put some high octane in there, there's a chance he gets thrown out. Who knows when we'll see him. Flores is doing a good job with the team overall. You can't count anything out. No. So, but that being said, and this is the truest thing I can say all day, never trust a Thursday night game.
Mm-hmm.
Because this could be guys that we're not saying. Patrick Laird could go off to this game and have 3 touchdowns, and nobody's going to see it coming. It is completely unpredictable.
Yep.
It's the scariest game to go with, and then you're rolling the dice on guys, and you have more people later in the week, and then if a guy fucks up, you're panicking about the rest of your picks. So it's That's my piece on Thursday night games.
I agree with you. And I actually think we did a pretty good job predicting last week's Thursday night game, the Browns-Cincinnati Bengals. We had a lot of correct picks in that game. We're like guys who we projected to go off in that game based on 1 week's value. We kind of predicted, I think I mentioned I thought Baker was going to turn it up, and he did. Certain people that we predicted were going to score, we'll talk about them, but they scored. So let's do that for week 3. Let's get people who they need to have in their lineups here. My first one of this matchup, James Robinson. Throw him into your goddamn lineups. He is a low-end RB1 for me for the remainder of the season. 16 carries, 102 yards, a touchdown, 4 for 3, 18 yards. He had about 94% of the targets from the running back position, and he was a stud this week and helped them really solidify things. He is my first player that I have to go off this Thursday night.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think his stock's only gone up. Like, honestly, you know what I mean? We knew they were gonna mess around with things once they let go of Fournette, and I think he's honestly gonna be the guy up. Like, he's looking better and better as weeks go on. And honestly, I think the team is getting a lot more comfortable with Gardner Minshew, which should open things up. That should open up more passing plays, which should open up more running lanes in effect. So we honestly really could see him start to go off.
My biggest fear with this game, or at least with this team, was Jay Gruden, because I know him. You can see behind me that I follow a team that he was the coach of for many years.
Oh yeah. How about that?
I mean, but Jay Gruden, he had a real tendency to not use running backs correctly all the time. And that was my worry going into this game. It started out that way, and then James Robinson ripped off a really good touchdown run. He looks ferocious. He looks fast. He has a burst.
Yep.
He's not the fastest, but he has really fast game speed. So you can feel comfortable plugging him in as your RB2 going forward if you have one of those studs. And if you lost someone, you can be comfortable throwing him in as your RB1 if needed. He is the guy to own. Even though he's projected 9.3 this week compared to 11 for Chris Thompson, I disagree with those numbers. I think James Robinson is going to be the guy to step up this week. Thompson might get in the end zone, but James Robinson is going to set the tone. And in my opinion,
Thompson's an interesting choice, but I'm with you on that. Like, you got to go with Robinson at this point. Right.
And I'm almost positive. I could be wrong. We should ask Sean, but I'm pretty sure the run game is a little weaker for Miami than the pass game.
Definitely is.
So with that in mind, going into the targets, Matt, I predicted 20 points for DJ Chark. Didn't happen last week. I don't think it happens again this week. Like we said, that secondary for Miami.
Oh, that secondary is something else. And I think that's actually what's hurting DJ Chark right now, is he's being treated as the number one, so he's getting blocked like the number one. I know you have your theory about sophomore slumps, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Chark here. It's accurately his second year, right? Either way, last year was his breakout year.
My philosophy on the term of sophomore slump is your sophomore season, no matter if that's your second season or third. If you didn't start your whole season and then you had that good, like Brashad Perryman is essentially in a sophomore season for me. So that's how I define it, because that first year you could break out and this and that, and then that second year is where you really come and tone down. Now, granted, It doesn't happen as much for veterans in their like third, fourth, fifth year. Generally, that sophomore, slump is for second-year guys, but it doesn't matter. So for us, James Robinson, I do like DJ Chark. I don't love him. All right, he's not exactly one of my guys. Laviska Shenault, leave on the bench for right now. He does get some.
He gets looks.
He gets some, and he gets some rushes too. But it's just not enough right now for consistent, production from him. On the other side, Matt, the big one I want to talk about, we talked about Myles Gaskin. Go out and get him. I think he's going to be the guy. Now, of course, we say this, and Jordan Howard will probably go off. The big question here is not even the wide receivers. Mike Gesicki, you called it, man. You fucking called it. I'm giving you all the credit. He wasn't even on my radar. 11 for 8, 130.
He's nasty.
And a touchdown. Does he do it again on Thursday night?
Let's hope so, because this guy is I once heard him described as Saquon-level athletic. So let that sink in for a second. They both went to Penn State. I drank across the bar from Mike Gesicki, and he is a monster of a man. He was at Bar a few months ago. Nice, when life existed.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, it's I honestly, he's a beast. He's a monster. Penn State clearly has been very good at picking up talent recently. You look at guys like Allen Robinson, Mike Gesicki, Saquon Barkley, obviously. Like this is a guy you've kind of got to roll the dice on. Everyone knew this was going to be a breakout year for Gesicki, and it's coming into fruition. Like he was hot at the end of last year, picked it up week 2. I would expect to see that steam train keep rolling.
If you have Mark Andrews, if you have Travis Kelce, he's probably the only 2 guys I would probably not start him over. That being said, Everyone else, it's fair game. We will get into more of that in the Feast and Famine show on Sunday, Matt. I don't know if you know, but I'm actually doing a live Feast or Famine show for about an hour to 2 hours every Sunday. We're going to go over my Feast or Famine list. The way I do my stardom sit-ins is a little different. There are certain tiers and there are certain guys that can bleed over and be ahead of the guys that are on my rankings above them. And I did this in a very unique way. With the way we did it, it actually worked out really well. There was maybe 1 or 2 guys who were not in the right trajectory, rather. Cam Newton, I think, was one of them. And maybe it was like Darren Waller who went off. I had him at the top of my famine list because of potential of the Saints defense to shut him down. But I had him in what we mark as blue text. It's a blue, it's an identification that he could succeed a lot of players in the feast section, and he still has that potential. So there's ways that I'm going to give you these breakdowns, and it's going to be a nice give or take. It will help you really make the decisions, not just, well, should I start Mike Gesicki or, Darren Waller? Well, we're going to give you the entire breakdown and why, and kind of give you an idea of who you should elevate certain players over, even if some of them may produce better. The potential of them are high for a boom week or whatever. Some of these other guys, like a Darren Waller, a little more consistent. He should have been higher on that list. So those are 2 follies on our end, but that will all be discussed on Sunday. Going into today, man, hey, we finished 1 game in the first 10 minutes. We like Mike Gesicki. We like James Robinson this week. Gardner Minshew, fire him up if you don't have anyone better. DJ Chark, if you can find someone who's a little bit more of a better matchup or a better number 1,
if you can get,
go with him that week. No tight end. I don't care if Tyler Eifert had 11 points. I'm not starting any Jacksonville tight end, especially Tyler Eifert. And I'm also not starting the defenses this week for either of these teams. I do think it can actually be a little offensive matchup. On the Miami side, we like Myles Gaskin for pickup. We like we said, Mike Gesicki. And maybe one of the receivers will pop off for you. I personally am staying away from Preston Williams and Parker. But that's just me.
Really, I personally think if I was going to take one, it'd probably be Parker. I feel like he gets more targets. But I'm sorry, I'd stay away from Parker. I'd go with Williams. I said that backwards.
I agree. And so that's your first timer. So that is the Thursday night matchup. We are now going on to the next game, the start of the 1 o'clock games. The first one is a pretty interesting one to talk about, Matt. The Texans and the Steelers.
Honestly, really is. This is going to be, I feel like, more of a defensive battle, to be 100% honest with you. I don't know how much I would trust either quarterback in this game. Deshaun Watson, talented as all hell, but has looked lost without a true number 1 receiver. They need to get him some help because all the guys they got are, like, great second options, but nobody really stands alone as someone that can be relied upon. As good as Watson is, you need someone to throw the ball to consistently. That being said, I really don't know if there's anybody that I love in this game.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I looked at it personally, there's one guy who I think is going to have a bounce back week. He's not going to go off for like 50 points or 30 points or whatever. But David Johnson, I do think, even though this defense is really good, I think, like you said, they're going to key in on really shutting down Deshaun Watson and making sure that he can't move and make things happen.
Which equals dump off. Yeah.
Right. And I think that could equal more receptions and targets for David Johnson. It could be Duke Johnson, but I do believe that David Johnson, they paid him all this money and were embarrassed in that trade. They have to feed him the ball. Right? So
I couldn't believe that. When I first saw that trade, I was like, okay, good move. They got a running back. They're secure. And they're like, and it came out like half an hour to an hour later. Like it was late. They're like, oh, also they traded, Nuke for him. I'm like, I'm sorry, why would you trade DeAndre Hopkins? Why would you do that?
I agree. And it's like, you know what? This is kind of predictable of what we thought was going to happen with this Houston team, especially. Will Fuller, Randall Cobb, Brandon Cooks, they all were sexy names like 5 years ago. They're not really sexy anymore. And I'm not buying in on the tight ends. Jordan Atkins, Darren Fells,
Nope,
they both
not
had
touching
points.
them.
Don't touch them unless you're desperate in a 16-team league and everyone's taken and it's a 2 tight end league and people have like one on their bench. That'd be
But
the
also,
only
that's one thing I will say about that. That's what you get for being in a 16-team league. Do you not like fun? Why are you in a 16-team league? If you're in more than 12 teams, you're doing something wrong.
Now, I'll admit, I am in a 16-team league with Raz, and a lot of the injuries this week affected our team. We have Debo on IR, Drew Lock got hurt. We had Sutton. All 3 of our keepers are hurt. We lost a few other players, but Paris Campbell, lost him too. So we dealt with a lot of injuries, and that's a 16-team league with 3 keepers. But I'll be honest, Matt, I hate it. It might be my last year in it. There's no there's no IR spots there. And I don't know anyone in the league outside of Raz. He's my teammate, my co-owner of that league. I feel bad because I don't want to abandon him, but at the same time, it's like I just don't have fun.
That's a rough league to be in. Yeah, that's a tough one.
But so anyway, so we need help with that league. And I think we're both in agreement. If you're going to start someone from the Houston Texans, I think David Johnson is a guy who you can feel comfortable. I think he's going to do okay. I don't think he's going to put up 6 points. I think he's going to get more than 11 carries. I don't like Deshaun Watson. He will be on my famine list this week. And he is definitely out of – so, Matt, my categories is all you can eat, which are your top-tier guys, the guys that you can plug and play and not worry about matchups or anyone there. So the elite of the elite.
Your Saquon right? Barkley's, your Christian McCaffrey.
Exactly. But then you have your feast and your famine, which is your plays of the week, your sits, obviously. Deshaun Watson's going to be on my famine list this week. I do not like him. He has these weeks where he gets 10 points, does nothing, and I feel like one of those weeks. On the other side of things, I also don't think Big Ben's going to go as much.
No, I'm first of all,
defense is not bad in Houston.
I don't think Big Ben makes it through the year. I'm already upset that he broke one of Eli's records. He just surpassed Eli for 7th overall all-time passing, which still notable achievement. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think Ben makes it through the year. I just don't. I don't see it. He looked hobbled in that first game against the Giants, and honestly, I think we're underrated defensively. I'm not saying we're amazing by any means, but the Giants defense, if you look at the numbers, hasn't been completely outrageous. They're just on the field way too much. But that being said, Ben took a couple tackles and was like literally limping off. So he still played through the game, but I don't think he's got what it takes for the full season.
I agree. And I feel like that's the theme with this offense is like there's injuries, right? Like tendency for injuries, I should say.
Yeah.
Ben Roethlisberger, James Conner, even Juju has injury history. I feel like for me, the only guys I'm truly comfortable playing this week is Juju. And I don't know how comfortable I am. And if you have to, Deontay Johnson, I think, is worth a play if you need a flex guy. Maybe not a wide – or if you need a wide receiver.
I think Deontay's going to break out as the season goes on. What's going to be crucial for the Steelers wide receivers is having that number one guy. Because in them losing, or I shouldn't say losing, but breaking up the killer bees, they lost the consistency with the run game. You lose that dual threat in Bell. Connor had that one good year, but now it's kind of like, all right, I don't know what we're going to do here, what we're going to see. And they need somebody to really take the attention away so Juju can go off. Juju is not all that great on his own. So it's a really tough call here. I mean, they need someone to break out. Like we said, that could be Claypool in the future. Like eventually he could be the real field stretcher for them, and that would open things up underneath. But it's tough right now. And
that keys into what we're going to kind of discuss next is the targets for the wide receivers. Because I think we talked about it last week, and if you listened to the show last week or the episode before week 3 or week 2 rather, and you needed advice about a receiver to start, well, if you listened to our show and you had Deontay Johnson and you put him in, you're very happy right now, right? He had the most targets on the team last week with 10 targets for Big Ben, despite having the worst of the 3 games out of the 3 top receivers, not including Chase Claypool. Well, this week, he got the most targets again, most receptions, and now the most yards with a touchdown. He had the best week of these wide receivers. Like you said, I think he does break out this year. We already saw that last year. And he's one of those guys, Matt, who I said about the sophomore slump. For some reason, I just don't worry about it with Deontay Johnson. I think he'll have some weeks where he's not going to produce and he'll do some stupid things. But I think he is a legit number 2 on their team. And I think he could be a legit number 3 for your fantasy team unless you have like 3 studs.
Yeah, I'm I agree.
So to overview all that, we like maybe Deontay Johnson if you need to. Juju, obviously, if you're going to start him, he's one of your top guys. You're probably going to start him, right? Big Ben, unless you have one of the elites like Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, this and that, I say go for him. I do think he'll play decent, but be weary that he might have a down week against a pretty good defense. Texans don't put up a lot of points from a fantasy perspective, but their defense does play well against certain players. And I think this is one of those quarterbacks they're going to play well against. Now, again, Chase Claypool, 6%. If he's in your lineup, 16 fantasy points, Matt, 3 for 3, 88 yards. What I see there is consistency. He catches his passes, and he has big play potential. That's someone worth an ad. Even though it's a deep roster, I never trusted James Washington. And already we can kind of see that dial maybe changing just a little bit to Chase Claypool taking the number 3 role.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think Claypool's going to be a thing pretty soon here.
Awesome. So with that being said, David Johnson for the Texans, potentially Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and we sort of like Big Ben. Not really a lot of people, though, we like. Obviously, you're going to start Pittsburgh.
I don't know if I'd even say sort of like Big Ben.
so we're not as high on Big Ben. I think we're split a little on Big Ben. I don't hate Big Ben, but I don't like him either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not exactly thinking he's going to be doing too much work there against.
He's going to be, put it this way, he's going to be low on my feast list, very low in red, which determines that if anyone in that famine list you like better, you put him over that player. He's going to have a couple players that I'm going to have that catapult ahead of him.
There you go.
In terms of production. So that is the week 3 matchup between the Texans at Steelers. Moving right along, we're just going to reset the timer here. And we got the Bengals and the Eagles. Now, Matt, let me start this one off, please. I have to, okay?
Go for it.
Because I was pretty damn good in projecting the Thursday night game last week. All right? I don't like to toot my own horn, but I'm going to fucking do it. Because it's my damn show, and I was right. All right. CJ Uzomah. I said it last week. I said he was going to have a good game. I said he was going to get you a touchdown. I even said he was going to score the first touchdown for the Bengals, and he did. But he also tore his ACL. So, unfortunate for him, he had a great game, 6 for 4, 42 yards and a touch. However, there is another tight end potentially that we didn't talk about in waivers because I just don't know yet. He's kind of lower on that tier, but could be someone in a deeper league, especially if you have Joe Burrow, that you can look at, and that is Drew Sample. Drew Sample coming in off the bench with CJ Uzomah's injury. He had a couple of these catches before the injury, but ended up going 9 for 7, 45 yards. Not really stellar yards, but the targets are very interesting to me for a rookie quarterback who needs a security blanket.
So you'd say his sample size is low?
I'd say he has a very low sample size, but he did give a sample of what he could produce when he's in the lineup, and I do believe he could be worth a very deep ad. I would still have guys on my list when I'm looking down, like, Schultz and guys of that nature. Let me see here on my list. Dalton Schultz, right? Who else do we have? Actually, he might be pretty high on that list considering all things considered. So if you need a tight end and you're not a big fan of Dallas Cowboys like I am, and you want someone who can get some volume, Drew Sample could be a very interesting deep ad or a good DFS play this week. Matt, Joe Mixon didn't do well last week. He was projected well this week. Still didn't play too well, Matt. A guy who we weren't high on. He put in 10 fantasy points. I remember that, so I don't need to look at anything. Not really that great, though, for someone who was being drafted in the first round. We talked about him last week. We're not high on him. I would be lukewarm on him again this week, I guess, if I had to say anything.
I'll back you on that because it's the Bengals being Bengals. Even with Joe Burrow there, it doesn't quite seem to be the injection of life that we quite expected this team to have. I will say the one, outside of Burrow, the one really good option seems to be there in this offense is Tyler Boyd. I kind of thought at the beginning of the year that AJ Green was going to have this renaissance season. I thought the new arm at quarterback would really kind of just rejuvenate his career, and we'd see some vintage plays here, and it hasn't come as of yet. Now it's only week 2. That could change. But I don't know. The only guy I'd really be interested in here is Tyler Boyd, unless you want to, roll your dice on the samples like you're at Costco and go with a true sample here.
I mean, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned him. Tyler Boyd, I've liked him every week. I was high on him last week, Matt. He was one of those guys I did predict to get a touchdown. He did. I think he is going to be quickly becoming the best option. Now we see the targets were there for AJ Green. 13 targets, only 3 catches, though, 29 yards. Something just seems off with him. I agree with you. Tyler Boyd is the guy to own. I'm not sold on Mike Thomas. Don't go after him. He had a decent week, but it's not worth 4 for 4, 31 yards and a touch. Joe Burrow, I do like this week. Start him against that team. There is some injuries there, but, I mean, that team is just not playing well. I do think this is going to be a very emotional game. Both teams 0-2. They both need a victory. So I do see a high attempt game by the quarterbacks here. If I had to pick a quarterback, I'm telling you right now, Joe Burrow is the guy I'm going over Wentz, especially now learning that they're losing their left guard. But for me, Drew Sample, you can pick him up on the waiver wires. I think he could be a really interesting addition. Try not to start him this week if you can. Although I will say the Eagles have gotten shredded, Matt, by tight ends. 4 touchdowns in 2 weeks against the Eagles from the tight end position. Logan Thomas week 1 had a really good week. Obviously, Tyler Higbee went off against him last week. That's why I really like Sample. I think he could be a very sneaky play and is my deep fantasy producer to be a top 10 tight end this week. How do you like that? Mm-hmm.
I like it. I do like it. That's a very good observation that I actually wasn't aware of.
That's a bold one, man. That is a nice little bold analysis.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it's if you trust me on CJ, you're going to trust me on Drew Sample. You know, I really like him this week, even potentially over a 1 Dalton.
Yeah, because I mean, and it's like you said, the targets speak for themselves. Like, that's huge.
100%. Now, on the other side of that coin, we have the Philadelphia Eagles. And I can't help but to laugh at just how pathetic they've looked. And you can say they had injuries week 1 and all this stuff, but week 2, you didn't have that. And you still kind of got shit on. I mean, Carson Wentz looks as bad as I've ever seen him. I mean, you got the head coach in the post game.
I mean, Carson Wentz, I think, is still rattled from week 1.
He is seeing ghosts, and it was so obvious last week, and it looks super obvious this week. His plant foot is super stiff. He's overthrowing a lot of players. I've never really seen him like that.
He just wants to get rid of the ball. He's terrified.
Have you noticed?
You're gotten to him.
Have you noticed he barely ran to try to avoid a sack and make a play against the Rams?
I actually did. I didn't watch too much of that game. It was mostly on Red Zone, so I wasn't getting too many details in.
I'm going to do a little animation here. This is the only time I'm going to get up during this stream. But he was week 1. The one thing I noticed, Matt, was seeing this. Okay, every time a sack guy or a defensive player would come at him, he would bend down and they would have to hit his head.
Just get ready.
And it's one of his escape tactics that they sniffed out last week really hard. And basically, once they figured out, hey, you're not going to do that anymore, I didn't see him try to avoid anything since. Not that game, not last game. And I watched the film on both. He is scared right now. And it's not just because of the injuries that he had. Even with most of his line back last week, he was scared. And the stats show it, man. 26 of 43, 242, no touchdowns, two interceptions. And it was just not a great week. Now, Miles Sanders kept him in that game to a degree, but it was obvious that Wentz was legitimately the problem for once. And so I think when you look at this team, you have to see, okay, well, are they going up against a great defense this week? No. Cincinnati's not as good as the 2 first defenses they went up against. But I don't expect the receivers to really produce crazy. I mean, look at the receivers. They're not that great right now. I do expect one of these guys to get over 10 points. I just don't know which one. I don't know
if I trust anybody personally. I really don't think I do in that offense right now.
I think you do Miles Sanders. I think you do Miles Sanders. And in my opinion, because of the all you can eat, if you have these tight ends, unless you got one of the more intriguing like Mike Gesicki's, you know, I would actually start Mike Gesicki over these 2 guys this week. Just throwing that out.
That's exactly what I'm doing. I've got Mike Gesicki starting in my tight ends, but I've got Dallas Goedert in my flex because I'm riddled with injuries.
Hey, those are 2 good tight ends to have on the same team if you're going to choose any, right?
You know, you're going to do it.
So they were both projected 10 points. I do expect one of those guys to hit over that. I don't expect both. All right, that's just me personally. I could be wrong, and I have been wrong, so don't take that for anything. But 10.45 fantasy points for Eagles defense, I'm not seeing that. If their offense struggles again and the Cincinnati Bengals get going, Joe Burrow is gonna get some points on the board. I like Miles Sanders. I think you start him if you have him, and then the tight ends. Outside of that, you can roll with – listen, people are going to roll with the Eagles defense, and they could have a good game. I mean, listen, if you have them, that's probably the only one you have, so go with them. But my slam dunks in this matchup are Miles Sanders, potentially the tight ends. If you want to go deep, you go Drew Sample. I love Tyler Boyd this week. I love Joe Burrow, Tyler Boyd. A good DFS matchup. I do think, even though the defense is not terrible, they haven't been playing great, and I do think that Joe Burrow does get some things going and is really kind of pissed off that he hasn't gotten that first win yet. I think he's more motivated than this Eagles team is right now.
Yeah. I honestly think, I think the Bengals are going to want it a little bit more. The Eagles just don't look – I mean, I hate to even give them credit here, but they don't look like the Eagles.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. So that is our analysis for the Bengals at Philadelphia. We now move to the game that's going to be a little bit more, up your alley a little bit here.
Yeah.
The 49ers at the Giants. Now, Matt, before we start, I just want to say I think you guys actually have a really good chance to win this because of the mentality of the Niners right now with this field and this thing going on. Not to mention they lost two of their top linemen, their top running back, and their top quarterback here.
And what's their record right now? Are they 2-0?
No, I think
they might be 1-1. They're 1-1.
They lost to Arizona in week 1.
Yep.
And
I remember that in myself, in my own head too. Yeah.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be. Let me change that word. Surprise is the wrong word. I wouldn't be completely blown away. You know what I mean? Just because both teams are devastated right now, with all their skill positions. But and quarterback for San Fran. I mean, it's just, and like you said, the fact that you said they're scared about coming onto the field does play a pretty big role. And the Giants, I think, are kind of desperate to get a win to prove they can do something. Like, they're obviously lost without Saquon. A lot of this game is going to fall on Daniel Jones' shoulders.
I don't know if you can call this an upset, but I think this is upset written all over it for New York Giants. I do think that the pass rush is going to be affected, obviously. I mean, you can't say no, right? To Solomon Thomas, Nick Bosa out for the season. They're gone. They don't have D Ford, I don't believe, at the moment.
No, it actually just came up right before. That's what I was looking at a moment ago. D Ford's out for this game.
So D Ford's still out. There you go. Jimmy Garoppolo, we don't know what's going to happen. We've seen Nick Mullins play, and they're missing Raheem Mostert. Those are big guys to miss. And not to mention, you still don't have Deebo Samuel. With that all in mind, we could see the return of George Kittle tonight. Or, I'm sorry, on Sunday.
Even if George Kittle's out there, I think that's more of a decoy than anything else.
I agree.
You should not play through injuries the way they're trying to play through right now, because it's too early in the season for that. It really is. In all honesty, this is when you need to start relying on your backups. We need more Borden, more Ayuk. I know Sanu is new, but just be run a go route. Honestly, if I was going to take a wide receiver in daily fantasy, if I was going to take a wide receiver, I'd roll the dice on Sanu.
Now, the tight end is the most interesting thing for the San Fran 49ers, right? Because we don't know exactly what the deal is. He's going to try to play. What I would say about the tight ends this week with George Kittle and Jordan Reed, because especially if you're one of those people that went out and got Jordan Reed last week and took him because, of the injury and figured, hey, I'll have his backup in case, right? It's probably one of the best tight end handcuffs right now to have, in my opinion. But if you have both and you're dealing with that right now, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do Sunday, even if Kittle can go? What I'm going to say is you better monitor everything that comes out of San Francisco's reporting. If there is things where he's getting a lot of limited days and he's going to play, or if there's any mention of a snap count, Jordan Reed might be the better option if you have him as the secondary guy to throw in there, even over Kittle this week. I wouldn't recommend going with any of them if you could. Again, I actually do believe the Giants defense is better than people give them credit for. And I just don't see Nick Mullins being this fantasy producer the way that Jimmy Garoppolo might be able to get Kittle the ball like he did last year. I do think if you buy Jerick McKinnon and you get him tonight and you need the running back to start, you can feel comfortable throwing him in. The only other guy right there right now, I think, is Jeff Wilson and Kyle Juszczyk, which they'll use a little bit, but it's going to be Jerick McKinnon in that pass game and in the run game, outside runs. You want that run game for the Niners if you're going to take anyone from this matchup.
Agreed. And good job saying Juszczyk. Because I have the toughest time with his last name.
I practiced before.
But yeah, I mean, I'm in line to agree with you here. There's not too much good fantasy wise to take out of this game. There isn't too much. Daily roll the dice. Ongoing leagues.
I wouldn't touch any of the receivers. I do like Brandon Ayuk, but not this week. I could be wrong. Listen, he could have some weird reception, but I don't think he's going to get.
Well, here's the thing: even if Brandon Ayuk comes in as potentially the number one, he's going against who? Bradbury.
Yep. Yeah, and that's tough. And Bradbury had
Bradbury had a great game. Bradbury was the PFF Player of the Week, Defensive Player of the Week.
Was it? Nice. I think Fabian Moreau was the Defensive Player of the Week 1. So
there you go.
2 corners in 2 weeks for both our teams. I love that. But
NFC
now,
Beast.
Speaking of the NFC Beast, one of those teams, the New York Football Giants.
Love it.
All right. Saquon, obviously, the big story. He is out for the year, and that is tough. We talked a little bit about Deion Lewis, about how he should be picked up. We are going to add Devontae Freeman to this list so that you guys later in the week, if you look at this, you'll see the rankings, and we'll keep you up to date on news on that end as well. Certain controversies like this, I'll update my projected rankings to give you an idea of what's going on in the week. Matt, without Saquon, do they have to win with the pass game this week, or can they rely on maybe a Daniel Jones running back committee combo to rush it into victory this week?
I think that a lot of this week is going to rely on Jones' ability. It's going to be a lot on what he can do. The committee might help, just because it'll give, if they're smart, what they're going to do is give different looks. You know what I mean? Be like, okay, Devonta Freeman's out. We don't know what this means yet. Okay, fucking Wayne Gallman's out. We're not quite sure what he's going to do here. Just keep it mixed up. The one thing we know, I think, is that Lewis is going to be the pass catching guy. He's got the most experience with the head coach. It's really all you can predict. Like it's going to fall a lot on Jones. And I think he's going to have a tougher time because there's not the threat or the promise of Saquon Barkley to dump the ball off to. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Where it's like a lot of times teams were game planning for that. So I think he's going to see a lot more of a fierce pass rush. And without having Sterling Shepard in there or potentially not Golden Tate, he's going to have a tough go.
I agree with you. And I think, I think you could take a chance on Deion Lewis and DFS. I think you could throw him in your flex if you're desperate. I personally, I do think Darius Slayton. Now, here's my thing about Darius Slayton and the San Francisco offense, or defense rather. I watched a lot of film on San Fran against Arizona because the Jets film was just but the Arizona film, and I did see the trend, and I did watch a little bit of the Jets film, but the trend that I saw, Matt, was same thing that I saw in Seattle with Richard Sherman, is that he stays on his side of the field. And in week 1 against DeAndre Hopkins, for most of the first half, he was on the other side. It was Emmanuel Mosley who was getting burnt like toast against DeAndre Hopkins. Now, they did transition, they did adjust, and eventually, Richard Sherman did travel with him. But it looks like the way they try to do it is they start off with this base scheme, Richard on one side, the other corner on the other side, who's not that great. It could either be Ahkello Witherspoon, I think, or Emmanuel Mosley, but they're not that great. They're getting burnt. I think you're going to see Darius Slayton come out lined up on the left side of the offense a lot of the times this week, and they're going to get some shots to him. And if Richard Sherman doesn't travel, which sometimes he does only with the top guys, it seems like, if he doesn't travel at all, I do believe Darius Slayton is a prime breakout candidate this week in terms of – I know he did it week 1. I think he does it again this week.
I mean, I think it depends on how this pass rush looks, because I think it's gonna depend on if Jones gets him to actually set his foot and, chuck the ball downfield. I have full faith Slayton will get it, but it's a matter of him having the time to throw it. Well, so we'll really see what this pass rush looks like without Bosa and the rest of these key players.
Yeah, I might not have said that if, Bosa was there, Solomon Thomas was there. But those guys aren't there. That pass rush.
No, they're not. They're not. The pass rush isn't going to be the same.
But they're not elite anymore. And I do believe, hey, listen, even if you can just get a couple, 1 or 2 opportunities, I think Slayton can have a good game. For me, I personally do like Deion Lewis in a slot, in a flex position, a DFS lineup as a flex in there, or just from a value standpoint, I think he might be a little lower. But I really, really do like Darius Slayton personally this week. Matt, what about Evan Ingram? 9.5 fantasy points, 8 targets last week, 6 for 65, but no touchdowns. Does he
Here's my
build on
thing.
that now, or is he?
I don't know what happens with Evan Engram. Like, this is the guy who broke out his first year only for the fact that Saquon Barkley, that Odell Beckham was injured. I really don't know if he has the wherewithal to carry the team. He's been someone, as a Giants, I've been waiting to see breakout. All you ever hear about is his potential. I don't really trust him. I really don't. He could do amazing, but who knows?
And guys, that's coming from an avid Giants fan. Okay, I'm not as high on him either. It is because people are going to think like, oh, this team is going to be so beatable now, but they're not. They're still a good defense. They're still middle of the tier. Even with the injuries, their depth is actually going to be really tested this week, so we'll know for sure. But they have depth that they can work with, and I think we see some of that come to fruition. But I do think that yards will be available, and I personally like Darius Slayton. I'm going to have him on my feast list this week. I do have Daniel Jones on my famine. I don't like him this week, even in spite of all that. And San Francisco's defense, I mean, you're going to start him and see what they could do this week. But, reality is don't expect the same results that you were getting in the previous weeks.
Sitting throwing rocks across the pavement, hoping it will cave and swallow me whole. Wondering why my